Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell. You'll get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And when I'm not asking Bruce, hey, how big was Batista's? Well, you know. One of the things I like to do is help people save money. And if you're watching this video right now and you're in a 30-year loan, man, you're overpaying your single biggest bill and you may not even realize it. I want you to do a little experiment for me. Take your calculator out, multiply your monthly house payment by 360 payments. That's how many payments there are in a 30-year loan. That big scary number, that's your total of payments. You're looking at that number? You know you can do better. Keep more of your own money right now and go to savewithconrad.com. Or maybe you've got credit card debt. Man, it's not a matter of if I can save you money with that. Your average interest rate on a credit card is more than 20%. And by the way, all the interest you pay on those credit cards, it's not tax deductible. Whereas the mortgage interest, well, that is tax deductible. So if you owe this debt, it's up to you how to pay it back. Doesn't it make sense to get the cheapest rate possible and the greatest tax deduction possible? Find out how much money you can save right now for free at savewithconrad.com. You don't need perfect credit. Even scores in the 500s can be approved, and it's no cost out of pocket. But maybe best of all, we're licensed in more than 40 states. We can help more families than ever before. But how much can we save you? Find out right now for free with a quick quote from savewithconrad.com.
Merry Christmas to all that celebrate it. We're happy you're with us. Hope you had a great Christmas. I'll sum up mine very quickly. My Christmas was shoehorned into my two daughters and my two granddaughters' schedules. So I got some time. It's like going to a high-dollar doctor. You know, they're experts, and you got to see them, and you want to see them. I love my kids. So we met last Saturday in Tulsa. So a nice 200-mile round trip for Grandpa, and we had a great meal, and that was the main thing. You know, I've come to find out this. The holidays, I'm growing past maybe my era of relevancy because I'm not so jacked up anymore about gifts.
Right.
I give them.
Right.
But I was really jacked up about sitting at a big table with my two daughters and their husbands and my two granddaughters all at one table having a meal and not getting in any hurry whatsoever to rush out or get to another line or go to another house. Just chill. And it was absolutely awesome. So I reevaluating some of those things, and hopefully I'll be able to spend more time with my kids. As a matter of fact, my youngest daughter and her husband have expressed an interest to join us on pay-per-view in downtown Chicago on AEW coming up in February. So cool. I want to do little trips like that every now and then. It's a kind of a cool thing. Come see Dad work and and enjoy the atmosphere because it's going to be pretty cool. They sold out in 50 minutes, so people are going to be jacked up and ready to roll.
Absolutely, they are, and we've had a lot of requests because Eric, Tony, and myself did a show last year at C2E2, and that's of course the first time that a lot of the guys like Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks had an opportunity to see the hype that is C2E2 in downtown Chicago. And yes, JR and I are working on putting together a show right now, and Tony Schiavone is fired up to spend everything that he earns at that show on Batman paraphernalia. So it's going to be a fun trip, man. Whether you're a wrestling fan or not, you got to come check out C2E2. And if you're there, I would encourage you to find some sort of scalp ticket situation because the AEW show in Chicago, you have to see to believe, man. You guys are in your element there. That's your real hometown crowd.
Seems like it. And they've accepted us very well. They're willing to accept the blemishes as we grow. And that's going to be what you're looking for with a real true fan, is that they're willing to be somewhat patient and understand that this is what we're doing in AEW, building a new brand, trying to get more talent over, creating new stars, all those things you hear discussed freely. And sometimes even from people that know what they're talking about. We got to be patient. So, we tried the patience of some fans apparently here lately, but none of the things that are identified over and over again are uncurable. So I'm very optimistic, Conrad.
I do feel like we should mention, the video went viral, last Thursday, a week ago, of the Dark Order beat down at the end of the show, and I think one of the gentlemen under a hood was trying to give the business and the what for to Dustin Rhodes, and Well, it looked a little less than awesome, and everybody had an opinion about it. And I think it, unfortunately, it may have put a damper on some of the fun that the Young Bucks were having, because they promptly left Twitter the very next day. So, I know that toxic, Twitter exists in the wrestling landscape. And when you can manage to run off two of the nicest guys that I've ever met in the wrestling business, something must be amiss.
They didn't deserve that. Come on. Those kids didn't deserve that. They worked their ass off. They're dedicated to the brand. They sacrificed some of their own clout, if you want to say that, or their own being over by putting other people over. Then they get bitched up because they're putting too many people over. And if they weren't getting beat, then they'd be selfish because they're not putting anybody over. It's like a cat chasing its tail. There is no conclusion, none whatsoever, to this scenario. But apparently people that do this, Conrad, this is my only personal take, I may be wrong, have lonely ass lives. Most of them seem to be poor, miserable bastards with nothing else to think about, to invest their life in, especially here at the holidays, than a very poorly executed piece of business in a wrestling ring. And it's as if, we've created this amazing sin that can never be duplicated. Hey, look, man, since the 70s, how many matches do you think I've called that were the absolute drizzling shits?
Oh, sure.
At every brand with some big names. You ain't got to be an unknown under a mask to shit the bed.
Right.
I knew that the crowd did not go crazy on how we went off the air because I was in the arena.
Right.
And you can feel those things. If you've done it long enough, you can feel a lot of things. The crowd, and their body English, and their noise they make, and their facial expressions. There's stories being told. That's great market research for all of us to pay attention to. So, but I never knew how bad that one piece of business was until it was everywhere. And a lot of people want to really make sure that I saw it, as if I could go back in time and fix it.
Right.
Or I could pile on. It was poorly executed, folks. And hopefully nothing like that will ever occur again. And I know everybody that has some ability to change things in AEW are well aware of it. So, I don't know what to say other than, I if I had not seen that clip that went viral, as you mentioned, Conrad, I would not have known how bad it was.
Right.
So, hey, not the ideal way you want to go off the air, but god dang, man, come on, folks. It really is. I love what we do. I'm a pro wrestling guy through and through, more than most folks would ever imagine, ever dream, and maybe more than I should be sometimes, quite frankly. I should diversify my life as well. But I'm not on Twitter hiding behind the keyboard, being a big badass or self-professed wrestling expert. And here's what they should do. I'll talk about this on my podcast. Here's what we'll suggest. Okay, well, whatever. I wonder if those guys that are doing that are actually suggesting these ideas to the right people in AEW, or if they're just broadcasting their own shit so they get some clicks. I don't know that. Anybody know the answer to that? I don't know. So I think everything that people saw can be fixed. I'm as excited about this brand as I've ever been. I know we're going to be just fine. I truly believe that, Conrad. It's not just me bullshitting. I'm 67 years old with a 3-year contract. You guys do the math. I'm on the back nine, baby, and I ain't planning on going out of the back nine, less than what I want and what I feel, what I need. So we're going to be fine. This is going to take some time. So the question is, how much time? I don't know. I don't know that answer. It could. I think in a year from now, we'll be able to see a lot of growth and a lot of things change, a lot of different faces and different roles, new talents coming in. But it's a hard act to balance to keep your incumbents, so to speak, over while getting other talents over. So it's a hell of a deal. So we'll be fine. I really believe that. And I was embarrassed to see what I saw. Did I like it? Hell no, I didn't like it. Who could like it?
Right. For
God's sakes. So I'll follow them. I'll just admit to all of you, I thought it was the drizzling shits. So that'll be your buzzword to get your clicks on your websites. JR says bid on AEW was the drizzling shits. And you won't mention this, but the drizzling shits can be cured. They won't mention it, I guarantee you, because they don't have the balls. They need one of our T-shirts, Conrad. The thimble shirt.
They do. And of course, we're talking about the shirts over at JimRawShirts.com. If you haven't lately, you got to go check this out. We have got some hellacious designs over there, including, and I think this is my favorite, CAKE in the old Dare fashion. Let's take a hit of chocolate cake. Of course, that was code word for Bobby Heenan and JR back in the day, and trim those coconuts. Maybe one day you'll be as over as your girlfriend. Lots of good stuff over at JimRawShirts.com. But the real reason we're here is not to talk about AEW or t-shirts or the holidays. We're here to talk about a holiday tradition called Starrcade, the 1988 edition. This one went down on December 26th. That's right. Today is the exact anniversary from the Norfolk Scope in Norfolk, Virginia. 10,000 fans are there. We're going to get a 1.8 buy rate for the pay-per-view. And the tagline for this show is True Grit. And this is very much a different time in wrestling. You know, we're very much used to a pay-per-view every month now, and sometimes two. But here in 1988, there were three. We had the Bunkhouse Stampede in January, the Great American Bash in July, and now Starrcade in December, closing up 1988. Of course, Starrcade is a holiday tradition. This one is going to take place the day after Christmas, but years prior, it was a Thanksgiving tradition. What'd you think of the idea to move Starrcade away from Thanksgiving and closer to Christmas instead?
Well, you got yourself away from the Survivor Series.
Right.
You know, unless you just like walking on the same side of the street that you got your ass whipped on yesterday, I think I'd probably move it to another date. And for many years, as a matter of fact, my youngest daughter and I were, and both my daughters and I were talking about this yesterday or Saturday, that the fact that, you know, there were so many Thanksgivings and Christmases that Dad wasn't there, because we always had in Mid-South, we always had that was major events. You know, Christmas night was a great night. And we had a lot of big events, especially on Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving night was the Superdome. That's where I had to experience that god awful oyster dressing. How you cannot have cornbread dressing at a holiday. It's, I believe, sacrilegious. I believe it is a punishable offense. God damn it, folks. Cornbread dressing is a part of the fabric of Americana. For God's sake. So anyway, so I didn't have a problem with it, but it got us away from the Thanksgiving ass whipping, and that was a good thing. So, and again, in most territories, over the years and the generations, a Thanksgiving and or a Christmas night extravaganza was normal piece of business. So it wasn't a big adjustment. So I don't think it was a bad thing at all.
So, you know, obviously it is a bit of a departure, but you know, one of the ideas is, to your point, Survivor Series is here now. It was a major catastrophe, Starrcade 87, because of the shenanigans that Vince McMahon pulled with the pay-per-view distributors and the cable companies. So we've got to find a new date if we want to partake in this newfound pay-per-view money. But the idea of doing it the day after Christmas, I think is smart on a few levels. A, you avoid Vince McMahon's Survivor Series, but B, it can be a nice stocking stuffer. You know, now moms and dads can give kids and other family members wrestling tickets, right?
Yeah. Or pay-per-view vouchers or whatever you get, you know what I mean? You can gift the event in various forms. Smart marketing in that regard, without a doubt. The only thing that I found it to be a little bit cumbersome was the fact that that's not true. Most of us traveled on Christmas to get to the event. So that was another day where you have Christmas in a hotel room.
Right.
And that can be a pain in the ass. But thank God there's Crown Royal, and I found it in Norfolk. And the other thing, I can't remember this hotel that we stayed at. It stayed at for years. And Flair and all those guys made it famous. And I can't remember the little bar's name in it, but boy, the ladies of wrestling, wink, wink, knew exactly where it was. And they're like 7-Eleven, man. They're just open all the time.
The NWA actually does a house show in Charlotte on Christmas night where Ric Flair would wrestle Eddie Gilbert for the first time. Of course, World Class used to hold big events on Christmas Day. And I mean, Christmas Day is very much a wrestling tradition. And we're going to do it the day after here for True Grit. But man, the business has changed, not just, from then to now, but inside the NWA as well. Let's take a look at what Dave Meltzer was writing. On Wednesday morning, Dusty Rhodes officially resigned as booker of the NWA. From all accounts, this was a forced resignation ordered by the TBS hierarchy based on several episodes over the past few weeks. On Thursday, Jim Crockett was officially informed that he would no longer be running the day-to-day operations of the company starting January 1st. Officially, the Universal Wrestling Corporation will be handled day-to-day by James Hurd, and currently an executive with Pizza Hut. Hurd's official title will be Executive Vice President of the company, with Jack Petrick acting as president and overseer of the operations. Hurd has had some wrestling background in that he was the director for Vince McMahon Sr.'s television tapings out of Washington, D.C. in the mid-60s, then the director for Sam Mushnick's television show in St. Louis from 69 through the early 70s. Hurd later became the general manager of Channel 11 in St. Louis, which was the station Mushnick's program aired on, and he followed that by a stint working the front office for the St. Louis Blues of the National Hockey League, and then went on to Pizza Hut, with Pizza Hut being in the process of being purchased by PepsiCo. Hurd was the number 2 man in the marketing department of Pizza Hut and decided to accept Petrick's offer to run the wrestling company. As of press time, the new booker of the NWA is Jim Crockett. This is expected to change in January. Nothing is for certain, but it appears that the booking will be done by committee, which had been speculated elsewhere. The makeup of the committee has yet to be determined, but it looks to me as if the present plans continue. The actual key brain and power in the committee will be the Nature Boy Ric Flair, which is both good and bad, and I'll get to that later, but there are numerous variables left in the equation. So lots of upheaval covered in the December 12th, 1988 edition of The Observer, the biggest of which being the result of this pretty controversial angle that airs on TBS where the Road Warriors were doing an interview. Dusty Rhodes would come out. He would challenge the Warriors. Animal pulls a spike out of his shoulder pad, sticks it in Dusty's forehead and then his quote unquote eye. Blood's everywhere. And this is a no-no from TBS, and apparently sort of the straw that broke the camel's back for Dusty being the booker. What can you tell us?
Well, he made a mistake there, obviously. If the home office mandates, and they're signing the checks, they mandate they don't want X, you don't give them X. Whether you believe X is what you need, or is meritus of it, or whatever. It's just, you can't do it. So that was a mistake. But it's a lot. There were a lot of cooks were beginning to migrate into the kitchen about that time. And most of the executives in Turner that I can recall in that era, all those years ago, didn't really have a burning desire to embrace the wrestling genre or the brand. They weren't overwhelmed that the redheaded stepchild was going to be brought into the big house to eat with the grown-ups. And so there was a few guys in the white shirt, red tie, blue jacket dudes that probably, to be honest with you, were subscribers to the Observer. And they felt, many of them did, that because they quoted Meltzer all the time, they felt that if they read the Observer every week and had done so for quite some time, perhaps even going to the fact of going back and archiving the issues and catching up, that they had enough education in the business to support their premises. And so they made decisions oftentimes in a vacuum without talking to the wrestling people. It should have been a synergy of conversation and communication, but it wasn't. Poor communication. And a lot of that was, a lot of people didn't want to work with Hurd either. I mean, he was a gruff, kind of a tough dude to deal with sometimes. So I just thought that it was really a political time. The brands were underachieving. The guys that had the little knowledge, that had the white shirts, they had a vision of what they wanted the shows to be like based on what they read in the Observer, in my opinion. They watched all the wrestling they could consume, which I applaud. But at the end of the day, they needed more practical experience and hung around the product. You never saw those guys over on the 12th floor. They were hardly ever at our place. I don't know if they didn't want anybody to see them coming into our offices. I don't know. But it was not a healthy environment there in that era. Not healthy whatsoever, because there was too many cooks in the kitchen, and there was a lot of buyer's remorse, so to speak.
Let's talk about Dusty Rhodes for a minute here, because I feel like Dusty, I guess we should mention we're just about a month out from where Turner has bought Jim Crockett's promotion. So there's going to be definitely sort of a change in management, and Dusty Rhodes, for whatever reason, was taking a lot of heat, based on, hey, we had to sell. And a lot of people were pointing to Dusty saying, well, Dusty overspent. And Dusty would say, it wasn't my job to mind the books. It was my job to pack the arenas. And they would say, well, houses were down. So it became the blame game for whatever reason. But Wade Keller sort of shed some other light on this and says that realistically, the Road Warrior Spike incident, while it may have been what we heard was the straw that broke the camel's back, there was a lot of other stuff beneath the surface. Specifically, he writes, ironically, when TBS took over the company, Rhodes was in a stronger position to retain his job than most casual observers would believe. Much of Petrick's knowledge and understanding of the wrestling business was coming directly from Crockett, who of course was very high on Dusty as a booker. However, there were a few outside forces pushing for Rhodes' ousting, but up until a few weeks ago, Rhodes was apparently going to retain his position in the early days with the new regime. The problem is a behind-the-scenes power play involving Flair, which actually had been going on since late October, and it all came to a head. Flair was able to make a deal with TBS, which increased his personal power to determine his own finishes and angles, and Rhodes was incensed because he felt Flair went behind his back to Petrick to get that power, and more so, it decreased Rhodes' power and control over what the promotion's world championship would be doing. Then a few weeks back, Rhodes tried his own manipulation to weaken Flair's position and booked him for only 5 dates in December. An ensuing blow-up occurred over Flair's role in Starrcade, which resulted in the Starrcade main event being changed from Flair versus Rick Steiner to Flair versus Lex Luger, a decision by Petrick made over Dusty's head. Rhodes would then miss a weekend's worth of major shows, claiming the flu, which is where his position weakened. The word was actually put out that Rhodes was as good as gone as a booker, but that word was premature. What appears to have been the straw that broke the camel's back was the angle that aired on November 26th, with the Road Warriors putting the spike in Dusty's eye on TBS with heavy blood and close-ups. The angle was originally slated for the Clash of the Champions show in Chattanooga on December 7th, but Rhodes knew his position was weakening and hurried to get it on the air to get major sympathy back with him and get himself with the promotion's hottest babyface, Sting, against the hottest heels, the Road Warriors, for Starrcade. Apparently TBS had sent a directive to the NWA because a few weeks of blood during the Express angles a few weeks earlier, where Jim Cornette bled heavily after being hit with a telephone regarding blood on TBS, and Blade Rhodes defiantly, and blatantly disregarded the memo and ran his angle anyway. So behind the scenes, I didn't realize this until I did my research this week. Flair and Dusty having heat over what Flair was doing and who was really in control of what Flair was doing is sort of the root of this. Is that what you heard as well?
Well, it was an issue, no doubt about it. There was the trust was lost, I think you could say, between the two great big alpha males that, is the world big enough for both of us? And maybe the world of JCP at that time, Jim Crockett Promotions, was not. That's you go back, it's certainly arguable. But they had, I think they had what they started out as a friendly rivalry. And the reason I say that is because, they did things like, buy one guy buy a big nice car, the other guy go buy a bigger one. I remember the same story about the fur coats. They had a fur coat competition, I think, unofficial competition. One guy got a big, nice, some kind of fur coat, and the other guy got something more elaborate and more expensive and more ostentatious. But the thing that really sealed it for me, there's going to be a friendly rivalry. I thought it started out was, Dusty was a big fan of the Celtics.
Right.
And Rick was a big fan of the Lakers. And at that time, the Lakers and the Celtics were the teams in the NBA. They had the great rivalry. They had Bird. They had Magic. They had all these wonderful elements of Hall of Fame players, and all that came together. And I think that Dusty and Rick both, maybe subliminally, looked at themselves like the Celtics and the Lakers. Big time rivalry. So then you come down to creative, because I'm assuming that both guys were under a contract that they had agreed to that paid them a salary, basically, or at least a downside guarantee of some significance. So then you come back, what's the other C? Creative. And there's the where the rubber meets the road. Two strong alpha males, both guys as good as there was in the field. Here's the thing about it. Here's the thing about the booking of that. Why the hell did you have to have every program center around the two of them? Flair should be working with other people and making other people, because even in losing to Flair, you up your game and your perception. And Dusty could have had so many better matches, or more matches. I don't know if they've been better, probably not, but they wouldn't have been bad with other opponents. And he did that to some degree. He kind of branched out with this idea of getting the youthful rub from Sting, and then going against the new heels, the Road Warriors. So I just think there's the cash and creative, man. I mean, you can say we could all analyze and Dr. Phil the son of a bitch to death, but the bottom line is it's cash and creative. And on this particular occasion, I believe it's more the creative side of it, and that could have all been solved. But if those guys had not worked together on an ongoing, regular basis, it seemed like they were working every major show. They weren't. It seemed that way. But if you went to both guys at that time and said, look, as the owner, I don't want you guys, we're going to split you guys up for a while, that you get pushback. Oh, no, we can't do that. So no matter how bad that the creative was between them, if you try to take any of the creative away from them, where they're not on top of the card, both guys, there would have been a pushback. So it was a damn if you do, damn if you don't thing. But I never saw a blow up between these guys. They'd talk amongst their friends a little bit, but I never heard of a big blow up or face to face shouting match. That if it occurred, I haven't heard about it and I didn't see it. So, but it was unfortunate, and it could have been solved so easily, folks. That great line: communication, communicate openly and honestly. And especially in this crazy ass wrestling business, and you'll be amazed at what you can accomplish.
How much of this do you think is just spillover from, when Rick was first getting going in the wrestling business, he looked up to Dusty. I mean, he even wanted to call himself Ramblin' Ricky Rhodes, and he dyed his hair and put a perm in it. I mean, he was carrying Dusty's bags. And of course, later, Flair would go on to get a lot of attention as being, one of the biggest attractions in wrestling, just like Dusty had. But then somewhere along the way, people started to consider, Flair one of the greatest, if not the greatest wrestler of all time. How much of that do you think just sort of, I don't know, was a burr under the saddle of Dusty Rhodes? Not that that's popular to talk about, but hey, wait a minute now. This guy used to want to carry my fucking bags, and now he thinks he's better than me. What the hell? Yeah,
well, it's a part of our aging process and our maturity process, I guess. All performers, including some announcers, are always leery of always look over their shoulder to some degree, and many will not admit that. I will, because I don't give a shit, and I'm honest. I'm an honest man. You're only as good as your last show. Announcers could be replaced very easily, even though for decades they weren't. You get used to that voice, like you get used to Vin Scully with the Dodgers or whatever. And all that stuff has changed. But I can understand Dusty's apprehensions, and the fact that he looked at it not from Rick's point of view, but from those that are supporting Rick's point of view, that it was being disloyal. There was Dusty, who was the top, most charismatic star in wrestling, and that it was Dusty who influenced Rick to become this bigger than life character back when Flair was influenced by the Dream. And that was during those days when Murdoch and Rhodes, that the Texas Outlaw tag team also. And they were beyond compare. Folks have not seen Dusty and Dick Murdoch as when they were true heels in the AWA and other places, but primarily the AWA, missing a great treat. And I bet you a lot of the wrestlers who listen to the show, and I appreciate them doing it, young heel teams say, how can I get better? You got to watch people that are better than you. And you don't want to say this, but you think it. And by the way, there are a lot of them. And go back and look at the Midnights and the Tully and Arn team and all these other. But go back and look at Murdoch and Rhodes. Go back and look at Joe Hamilton and Tom Ernesto, the Assassins. There are a lot of great teams I'm leaving out, but I don't mean to. I'm talking here. So that was kind of I'm sure I can understand it. But after a while, you think you got to get over it because it is what it is. You helped a guy get started, and he became really, really good. I would suggest that would be a cause for more being proud than being envious.
Let's talk a little bit about the Rick Steiner situation because I'm fascinated by this. Allegedly, according to the rumor and innuendo, because of Dusty maybe having some sort of real life personal situation with Rick, he wants not only to have Rick wrestle Rick Steiner, but he wants Rick Steiner to go over. And if the rumors are true, and you may debunk that and tell us it was a myth, he wanted Steiner to beat him in like 5 minutes, which is not typical of a Ric Flair main event in this era. Did you ever hear that story? And what do you think of that?
I know that, after it seemed like Conrad, and I might get my chronological might be a little flawed, but I think we saw a side of Rick Steiner when he was courting Robin Green on TBS, who was Nancy Benoit, woman, etc. And we saw a side of his personality that heretofore we had not seen. He had just been the scowling, dog-faced gremlin of his older brother of the star of the family type deal, and Scotty. And so he opened a lot of eyes there, and I think in a good way. And I for one could see going down the road in a good story told and building it up to where, the blue collar guy, the old amateur wrestler wearing the short black boots, and he still loves his singlet and all that other shit, somewhere down the road, again, in a well-told story, as a part of a plan, could beat Rick for the title, and WCW title, the world title, whatever you want, NWA title, whatever the hell. But I never heard about that sort of time, but that's an old booking thing to shock people, because there was a theory or school of thought that might be a little long, 4 or 5 minutes, but there's a school of thought that when somebody loses a quick one, that sometimes it's easy for the loser to make, the heel especially, to make excuses that he wasn't ready, he wasn't loose, all these things that have no bearing in truth, but they're certainly nice excuses for a villain to use. But I never heard the 4 to 6 minute deal or whatever it was going to be. But I did like the fact that here's the thing. I like the fact you're separating Rick Steiner, and making him a NWA challenger. And I thought he and Rick would have great matches. I really did. And then what you get there is that you make 2 stars. You make Rick Steiner the single and Scott Steiner the single. So now on your card, you got 2 guys, 2 matches that are going to be high quality with 2 guys that are over, instead of having 1 match where these guys combine their forces. So never was against Rick Steiner's push. I liked it, but I never heard the story about the quick squash type thing with Nate.
Let's talk a little bit about Jim Cornette. He was mentioned here when it was discussed that maybe that was something that first got on Turner's radar with regard to blood. And Cornette has said that Dusty came to him and said, listen, the fans have seen the other guys bleed, but they haven't seen you bleed. So he wanted him to get, quote, a little color. But Corny had admitted he'd never done it before. And he said it was cold inside of the studio. So when he cut himself, he didn't start bleeding. So he does it several more times. And then he bled a gusher all over his white suit. You were there for this. What'd you think?
Too much blood, man. It was distracting. It was, hey, look, at the moment, it was dramatic as hell, but there's nothing deal. It should have been rethought. Somebody Corny should have helped him a little bit there or something, so he wouldn't have cut himself repeatedly when he didn't need to. That's what I'm saying. Was it dramatic? Did it serve its purpose? Oh, hell yeah. Absolutely. But then I thought that angle was kind of dropped to more, it was deprioritized after such a startling thing that happened in the studio. That match should have been on top in a lot of clubs and given some of the other guys some time off, like Nate and some of these other cats are working every day. But that didn't happen. So I thought it might have been a little too much in hindsight. In the moment, being sitting there in the studio, I thought it was pretty damn dynamic.
Let's talk about Jim Herd for a minute. Jim Herd has, for whatever reason, always gotten a bad rap with wrestling fans, and I'm sure it's because the boys themselves would bury Jim. Before we get to, discussing the actual meat of the matter, talk to us a little bit about, what the expectation was coming in. When you guys hear that, okay, Dusty's going to be moved out, as is Crockett, so there's going to be a hierarchy change. And this guy, even though we've sort of all heard the Pizza Hut gaga for years, he was at least involved in wrestling from a television angle for years in well-respected territories. Did that give everyone hope, or was it just Pizza Hut jokes from day one?
No, it gave people hope. Anytime you can connect the name, your name, or the person involved in your conversation's name to Sam Muchnick in a positive way, that's a good thing in our business. Anytime you can connect and get the rub from Vince Sr., that's a good thing in our business. So he had some interesting interactions with some very successful and smart individuals on his journey. So we thought, most of us thought that didn't even research. A lot of guys didn't care. But we thought that that was a sign it was going in the right direction, because there was just so much chaos, turmoil. The dark cloud never seemed to want to go away, and the company was, found itself in a tough spot. Surprisingly, they found themselves surprisingly in a spot of bad business, needed money, all that good stuff. So we all knew that, what's going on here and how long we're going to be in business. And if Crockett's not going to be in business, which was the rumor, because he found out that the money wasn't there. I guess that accountant's name was Dave Johnson. I think it was. He kind of got half-assed famous because he was kind of blamed seemingly for the lack of communication that they're hurting right now on cash flow and all that stuff. So, I think we're happy. I think we were looking for, it was new, Conrad. It was fresh. Let's give it that's what I told guys. We should just give it a chance, because here's our alternative. What the fuck are we going to do about it?
Right.
What, you going to quit and go to work for Vince if he'll take you? That's what you want to do. That's what you should do anyway. But we got to give this guy, this new regime, and it was not just Herd coming in. I mean, they're putting the department together. There's secretaries and accountants and all kinds of people. It wasn't a one-man office. It was a whole staffed office. And so that was all that was changing. I met my secretary for the first time. I didn't hire them. They're already hired. So that's kind of how that worked. And so my idea was, hey, I'm single. I'm living in Atlanta. I loved it for many reasons. One I just subliminally referred to, and I'm in the wrestling business. So what the hell? Let's give it a shot, and we did. And unfortunately, it just didn't work out.
Jim, let's run through some of the things that Wade Keller is writing are going to change under Jim Herd, and then we'll move on. But there's some interesting stuff on here that I don't think is all that bad. Here are some of the changes. Number one, wrestlers will get weekly paychecks based on their contract. For example, a wrestler with $100,000 downside guarantee will get $2,000 a week rather than getting paid by the gate and having so-called balloon payments at the end of the year, some of which never materialize. Number two, wrestlers will have their hotels taken care of on the road. Number three, TBS, not JJ Dillon, will handle travel arrangements, and wrestlers will fly from their hometown, not everyone from Atlanta every time. Number four, all TV tapings, both for TBS and the syndicated package, will emanate from a mid-sized arena in the Atlanta area. Number five, the announcers on the syndicated package will remain pretty much the same. TBS will have Jim Ross and Tony Schiavone doing the PM show without David Crockett. However, Crockett will do a solo act on the AM show without Ross or Schiavone. An early speculation is either giving Crockett a bone, since the Crockett's are still in a position of some power, or perhaps they want to do away with the AM show and are putting David on solo to set up the ratings drop so it can be canceled, and then David can be done away with on television.
Wow. That's nice to read. God dang.
Number 6, Crockett, Rhodes, and JJ will have to move to smaller offices in Dallas. And number 7, there will be attempts to improve syndication, particularly in major markets like New York, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. And lastly, number 8, the television shows will be post-produced, so the quality of the production should improve. So if we're getting better quality production, we're moving to more reasonable offices. We're going to improve syndication. Wrestlers are going to get paid on a more regular basis, and they're getting their hotels taken out of, and they don't have to start their trips from Atlanta. They can start them from home. Wait a minute. Why did everybody hate Jim Herd again?
Well, because on the fundamental structured things, like you just read over, and I'll assure you that Keller got that information right from Herd. I'm guessing. I'd bet big money that he did, because it's funny when you go back and look at it over my career. Every booker, without exception, except maybe Ole, but at least every owner or every head honcho of a wrestling company has all talked to Meltzer, and later on with Keller. So these guys got good information, and everything you read off there that I was certainly refreshed by made sense to me. Was there anything on that list that you would have said, I don't know about that one?
No. I mean, I think everything here is an improvement, and, some of the frustration has to come from guys like Nikita Koloff. He supposedly quit the promotion on a Sunday as we march towards this Starrcade, and Meltzer would say, quote, mainly due to problems regarding the travel that we detailed a few weeks back about having to drive from his home to Atlanta to catch flights for the road shows. Nikita, who was for a long time may have been the single most over promoted wrestler on the circuit, save for Dusty himself, had fallen into the doghouse with Rhodes and Jim Crockett in recent months and felt he was about to get buried. And he was probably correct. Nikita is expected to work for a new independent promotion that Nelson Royal is starting up in the Carolinas. Obviously we know how that worked out, but Nikita quitting, did you see that coming?
No, I didn't see it right away because I wasn't privy to the conversations that Nikita and Dusty and Jimmy Crockett were having. I didn't know there were that many issues. He got over really big. Nikita did, thanks to Dusty, his look, and thanks to Dusty and of course. The Magnum TA tragedy helped get Nikita over as much as anything, because he became Dusty's friend in the Allied powers and had empathy for a fallen warrior that he had went to combat with. So that sad, tragic thing helped get Nikita over. And sometimes guys in their youth, in this world like this world of make believe and play fighting, they actually believe that they're as good as they're being billed. And certainly Nikita was over, but he was over because of look and position and how and his no selling and things of that nature, stuff that probably not the greatest thing in the world, but he got over. And that's what you always look for. You want somebody to get over. So he was, I didn't see it coming, because I thought that he and Dusty were kind of joined at the hip. Because, like I said, Dusty created a guy in a babyface role. He put him with one of the great Ivan Koloff, and you can't help but learn. That's an education itself. Those car trips are like they're just rolling classrooms. And so Nikita owed a lot to Dusty. And I saw Nikita pop up the other day on the NWA show. So it's good to see that he's back doing some stuff. I know he does a lot of church work, which I'm very proud of him for doing. It's very honorable. He's very sincere with it. So his life has moved on from being a faux Russian strongman to being Scott again,
right,
and doing a lot of good things. So, but it was a rocky road at that point in time, and yes, somewhat surprising that two old friends like that were on the outs.
It's just it's an interesting time because Dusty is this great beloved figure in wrestling, and Jim Herd is not. But when the changeover happens, it feels like a lot of people have started to maybe lose confidence in Dusty, and they're really excited about Jim Herd and some of the examples he's going to run out. And then we know over the course of time, boy, that flip flops in a major way.
Well, here's the thing about it. As hard as Herd worked in those structural things, those procedural things that were changing with the TBS brass, you know, I can tell you that I know a lot of wives were ecstatic that their husbands were getting a weekly check because it added some, some fundamentals, some continuity, organization, whatever, structure, for God's sakes, to their lives. And the fact that I had no idea, or if I did, I forgot about it because I lived in Atlanta. So, I didn't have the flight issues. I moved to Atlanta from Dallas. But man, I'm telling you, you got to drive from Charlotte to Atlanta to start your trip. That's the stupidest goddamn thing I've ever heard of. No wonder Nikita was pissed off. That defies logic. So, and if you did, I think what they did, they finally ran the prices, Conrad, and sometimes flying from their home was cheaper than flying from Atlanta. It just makes sense. So anyway, but we remember the sensational things, and Herd trying to get involved in creative was his downfall. And he didn't have great people skills as it related to working with the talent, and that was not a good thing. But the main thing is he, like a lot of guys, had enough knowledge of creative to be dangerous.
Let's talk about your old pal Ric Flair and Mark Madden. Mark Madden would interview him for the Pittsburgh Press for an article. There's some interesting stuff in here, but the thing that sticks out the most is when Mark asks Rick, "What do you think of Hulk Hogan as a wrestler?" And Flair would say, "He's always had the public relations to the WWF behind him, but I'd better not comment. Let's just say that while he has tremendous notoriety, I think wrestling fans who really follow the sport see me in a different light." What were the strategies that you employed with Watts and then here with the NWA and WCW to combat the marketing juggernaut that had become a Hulk Hogan led WWF? Because it does feel like pretty routinely there were veiled comments on the old TBS show, especially from the Horsemen, and Ric Flair in particular would talk about how the greatest wrestlers in the world were here. And you were trying to bring attention to, hey, we're not sideshow shit. The real wrestling is here. Was there any sort of strategy meetings that you remember with Bill Watts or anyone from the office about how you could differentiate yourself from the more, while wildly popular, cartoon presentation of the WWF and Hulk Hogan?
No, to the contrary, the Watts, the only thing that we did remotely paid attention to, WWF at the time was they came in to run, Oklahoma City, did WWF, and Cowboy was very competitive, very strong, bullheaded, stubborn, and very profoundly protective of what he had built. And all good things. So while they did a live event, a loaded card at the State Fair Arena, we went downtown to our building, the Myriad, it's known at the time, and had a meet and greet. And our meet and greet had all of our top stars. We brought in Kerry Von Erich and some guys from Dallas. Kerry was the headliner. And I believe that we outdrew them with a meet and greet. And they never came back. And Cowboy looked at it as a feather in his cap. But they came back later, of course, But nonetheless, at that time, during the quote-unquote wars, well, that term's been used a lot in the wrestling business these days.
Yeah, I have.
Yeah, golly. So anyhow, but we did. Cowboy's deal was, is this all you've got to do? Meaning to think and report and to follow the day-to-day of WWF. Is this all you have to do? What are you doing for me? What are you doing for our company? What are you doing for the company that pays your salary? And then you can justify your wise ass attitude. Well, they're an opponent, they're an enemy, it's a war. Bill, it ain't no war, kid. The war is getting people to come to our events, they're having trouble paying for their rent or their groceries or sending their kids to school or buying shoes. That's the goddamn war. The war ain't who's the biggest heel or who's getting the best push, for God's sakes. We love the fucking push, don't we, Conrad? You love the push. I love the push. Let's just fucking push together. So everybody loves the push.
Well, I know you're fired up about it, but the word on the street is Jim Ross loves pushy.
Yeah. Well, sometimes I've been known to try to act like I'm 40 when I'm 67, but so sue my ass. How's that? But yeah, I don't know. Cowboy just did. That was him, man. So, but it was a different landscape in Atlanta, because in Atlanta, because of the influence of the white shirted guys in red ties and blue coats, they are always aware because they read the Meltzer Observer and they watch all the wrestling. You could, if you lived in Atlanta at that time, Joe Pedicino and his wife Bonnie Blackstone, had that show on Channel 69. What was back to back like 6 hours of wrestling from territories and stuff.
Right.
They did the wraparounds. Well, hell, man, you could sit at home, and I did it many Saturday nights, and watch all night. Watch every Dallas and Memphis and all Florida, whatever, Kansas, whatever's out there. I watched because I was looking for talent.
Right.
I don't know what the other committee guys were doing, but I was looking for talent, and or to see something I'd like, or hear something I'd like to try, or something I could make our company better. So, but Joe and Bonnie did a phenomenal job there. Joe had a stroke. I'm sure a lot of folks realize that. Joe had a stroke not too long ago, and he's recovering nicely in Atlanta, south of Atlanta. And Bonnie's holding down the fort, doing a great job as always. And Joe and Bonnie, I know Bonnie, yes, because I follow, we're friends on Facebook. So you might think about that. Give him a how you doing? Happy holidays. Joe's fighting the battle, and he's doing better, so that's all good. But anyway, you can watch a lot of wrestling in Atlanta, and God knows what he did. So those TBS guys, Conrad, that were wrestling marks like me, did the same thing.
Right.
And they created their own ideas and their own level of intellect. Well, here's what I would book, or here's what I would do. Okay. And you heard that a lot.
Let's talk a little bit about Clash of the Champions. It goes down on December 7th. It's Clash of the Champions 4 Seasons Beatings. It's a 4.5 rating, a 6.8 share. It's going to average 2.17 million homes. And
think about that in today's market. Think about those numbers in today's market. A 4.5 rating. You know what I'm saying? It's just like how much the world has changed, right, and how much the television market has become so fragmented. And when people talk about the ratings now, and you see a stat that says, for example, on the big war on Wednesday nights, we all know there's a big war going on in the world. It only happens on Wednesday night on television with fictional programming. But God damn it, it's a war, folks. And without a war, you can have a push. Without a push, there's no fucking life. So, but that's a hell of a number, quite frankly. But that was a TBS. I think that was a TBS name. They did do some nice job on some creative stuff. They could do that. It's just when they got into the fact of booking matches and basically calling spots, it didn't work for me and didn't work for a lot of guys.
The show, Meltzer would say, I should point out this was the first time a TBS crew covered the show rather than a crew hired by Jim Crockett Promotions. There was a lot of finger pointing after the show because the production itself was subpar, particularly at director Tommy Edwards. Although some claim Edwards was made a scapegoat for problems due to lack of preparation, the lighting was awful, looking even worse than most of the syndicated shows. And I didn't realize until after the show was over that they had any kind of crowd in the building, as I figured the darkness was to hide the fact that they had a small crowd. When I found out the place was almost full, the lack of lighting made no sense and made it look cheap, particularly in comparison to the competition. There were many technical glitches. Lex Luger hosted the show along with Tony Schiavone, and frankly, while I thought it was a good idea at the last Clash with Flair in this role, it didn't work. Luger, who has much less personality than Flair, didn't work in the role either. He seemed very nervous early on, but got better, but was still stiff and uncomfortable throughout. I think that Meltzer sort of breaks down the entire card from here, but the thing I wanted to circle back to was, since you were involved in this a little bit, how the production being switched over from being handled by Jim Crockett Promotions to TBS was a bad thing. Because on the outside looking in, you're like, wait a minute. Well, those were wrestling people and these are TV people and it's a TV show. So from a production standpoint, this seems on paper like an upgrade, but in execution, not so much.
Not so much that night, but on the big picture and going forward, I believe it was the right thing to do, because we knew that TBS cameramen and directors and producers and audio guys and graphic people, et cetera, all that shit. They'd done baseball forever. They remember back in the day, TBS had the SEC football package.
That's right.
And so they did a live SEC football game all season. And so we knew that they had the sports ability. They had the equipment. Could we find the individuals that had the aptitude, especially the shooters, the camera guys, the aptitude to want to be there and invest in the product? And we eventually found that not too long after that, because going forward, some of those other in that regime, when Keith Mitchell took over, things got better. Keith Mitchell's now the head of production for AEW, but he did it for Fritz, he did it for WCW, did it for Dixie. So Keith's the best. And but Tommy Edwards got a short hand on that deal. He got that damn thing dumped in his lap. Now, you could ask this question: was he ready for that role? I don't know that. I don't know that he wasn't by any stretch of the imagination. He produced Tony and my studio show and the stuff we did in voiceovers. And that was, sometimes like pulling teeth. Ironically, when I was doing voiceovers for Access TV and the New Japan brand, Tommy is a director of the late edition Sports Center for ESPN with Neil Everett and whoever else the guy is, Jay Harris, I think. So Tommy's not done bad. No. And I seen him shoot the shit and talk to him and got reacquainted and got our numbers exchanged and everything. So Tommy's a talented guy. He might have been in a little deep water for that first go around because they had no time to prepare and to shoot something before they got there. You'd think, well, let's go up to Gainesville and shoot something. Let's go set up and let's do something that will prepare us to do a great job of doing live TV, because there are no retakes. There is no net. And that didn't happen. So it was all on him, and some of it was not as pretty as I'm sure he would like it to have been.
This show, I want to mention again, this Clash of the Champions, is Jim Crockett's first show as the quote-unquote booker. Of course, at this point, Dusty Rhodes has been demoted, and the main event is Ric Flair and Barry Windham taking on Jim Cornette's Midnight Express, a road where Animal would win the NWA six-man titles for himself and his partner Hawk and Paul Ellering by beating Dusty Rhodes in a singles match. Ivan Koloff had one arm tied behind his back against Paul Jones. Steve Williams would pin the Italian Stallion. The Fantastics would win the U.S. titles over Ron Simmons and Eddie Gilbert. We recently covered this show with Tony Schiavone, but I didn't realize at the time when we were covering it that this is actually Crockett's first show as a booker. What did you think of Crockett as a booker? We know it's going to be short-lived, but do you remember this show in particular or any of the creative thinking, oh, I don't know if I'd do this?
Not really, because you got to give a guy a chance.
Right.
And to see how it's going to work. And if the talents are doing their job, when they see how they're booked, their mind would start thinking at that point, how can I go into this scenario and win? How can I go into this scenario and lose? And how can I go into this scenario and work a return? So there's things that you can put together in your head, even not knowing what you're going to be asked to do that night or told to do, instructed to do, whatever you're comfortable saying. So, Jimmy was trying hard. I remember he was really going not overboard, very thorough on his enthusiasm and his instruction. So, and for a lot of us, he hired us. So, you're just going to be loyal to a guy. At least I am. But I thought that, look, you never know how these shows are going to work out. Sometimes you see a show, I've been on them lately, where you think it's going to be a home run. Unfortunately, things happen beyond one's control that prevented that. So I saw this card. There are things I probably would not have booked. I don't need to see Ivan Koloff fight Paul Jones, who was one arm tied behind his back. Speaking of Ivan, I don't need to see that. things like that. It's subjective. You like chocolate, you like vanilla, but no issues with Jimmy. We had the same. Everybody else was the same. Everybody else was in place. It's just that Jimmy had taken a layer off between Dusty and that everybody else stays the same and replaced it with himself. So it wasn't that big a change in that respect as far as communicating and all that, but subjective, creative is so subjective, Conrad, as we've talked about many times. You can look at it on paper and say, God damn, man, this is going to be awesome. I love this. And then it's like a fart in church. Just don't work.
Right after Clash of the Champions, Meltzer would report the future of Dusty Rhodes, the wrestler, is still uncertain. The word is that Rhodes will work through Starrcade, but nothing is certain about that. Nobody in the NWA seems to think that Rhodes will be around for the long haul. Rhodes has been negotiating with Vince McMahon, but no deal has been reached, and some in Titan swear that no deal will ever be reached. Other stories going around include Rhodes and Bill Watts opening up their own promotion, or perhaps Rhodes going to Florida with some of the NWA guys and opening up his own group. But at this point, that's all in the talking stages. Did you ever imagine in this era, even though you'd seen everybody else pretty much, at least tinker with the idea of going to work for Vince, did you ever think that Dusty would? I mean, we know he ultimately did, but that just doesn't feel in this era like even a remote possibility to me.
I was not surprised one iota, because, Dusty had worked so diligently, and every effort that he was involved in, unfortunately, didn't make a lot of money. And I don't know, he and I discussed it, that we both wish that we had been smarter investors and financial guys early in our career. And thank God I got smart enough to do that when I started making some pretty good money. But Dusty had made really good money without that preparation, or that, is there going to be another payday tomorrow type thing? Because a lot of those guys got on top. They just felt so invincible that those paydays were just not going to stop, man. I'm going to keep singing my hits and keep selling those records and selling out those concerts, man. It's my sound. So I thought that he would go to work for Vince, if that's what it came down to pay his bills and put some money in the bank and pay his taxes and all those things. So it didn't surprise me whatsoever. And it will never surprise me when somebody goes to work for another company, because, again, Conrad, what's it all about?
Cash
and creative.
There you go. Let's talk about who's coming in. Meltzer would say that Steve Casey is going to come in on January 16th. Michael Hayes will be here on January 23rd. Butch Reed is expected to start on February 1st. Brian Pillman's going to be coming in, and there's a good chance that Jimmy Garvin is going to return. And they're talking to Terry Gordy, but Meltzer would say that's doubtful, because Gordy is making great money in Japan, doesn't want to do anything to risk that Japanese deal, and as a result has already turned down Vince McMahon several times. So he's doubtful that he'll come in. We know that most of these wind up happening, but Gordy, do you remember there ever being even a hint that, hey, we're going to get him full time on a regular basis here in WCW?
Well, I think that's one of the reasons we were so excited about getting Michael Hayes in.
Right.
Although Michael Hayes is a great manager, I thought he was one of my favorite broadcast partners back in the UWF days for Cowboy. He's a natural. He's very gifted in that regard. And like I told Paul Heyman, made it famous in the show, Michael Hayes is easy to dislike as a wrestling villain.
Right.
He knows how to play that role. So maybe getting Hayes in place, and then we get Garvin in there. So now you got Hayes and Garvin could theoretically be together, and Garvin playing the Buddy Roberts role, but you need a big killer, because no matter what, we all know, and all due respect to everybody else, the other two dudes, Terry Gordy was the straw that stirred the Freebirds drink.
Right.
Without a doubt. And that's not a knock on Michael or Buddy whatsoever. He was that goddamn good, speaking of Terry Gordy. So, but here's the real issue with that, I think. Bam Bam had not taken care of his body. He's not a big gym guy, and he was having chronic issues with his knees. And when you're 300 pounds and you're doing things that 300 pounders aren't necessarily supposed to do or don't normally do, and a lot of those endings, those little journeys, those bumps end on your knees, cumulatively, it can really be taxing. And I think that was what was beginning to happen to him. I'm sure the arthritis was next. You know, he probably needed some surgeries, truth be known. But I think he was trying to extend his wrestling mortality by wrestling fewer dates, but still making good money. I think that's the biggest reason we didn't get Terry Gordy in WCW. And then we were able to do that later on with Dr. Death. I believe that's later on, yeah. And but that was under different circumstances as well, limited dates. So he wasn't going on the road to do much. They were going to work on TV, or TV act. So, but we couldn't get him at that era. He was too hot in Japan, probably making 10, 15 grand a week. That's pretty damn good money for a part-time gig.
Let's talk about this schedule. You know, we've talked about how crazy this schedule could be at different times. And before the biggest show of the year, Starrcade, Meltzer wrote, in typical NWA fashion, check the schedule out the day before their biggest show of the year. The guys work twice on Sunday, an afternoon shot in Greenville, South Carolina, and a Christmas night shot in Charlotte. Then flights from Charlotte on Monday morning were directed to Washington, D.C. rather than Norfolk. Of course, that meant the day of the biggest show of the year, after the guys had worked twice the day before, they all had to drive 200 miles from D.C. to Norfolk, and they were supposed to arrive by 4 p.m. in Norfolk because they wanted to go over the show early. I believe there were a few wrestlers who weren't even issued tickets for the flight and actually had to drive from Charlotte. And while this scenario is not unusual in wrestling, even the WWF wrestlers who regularly go through it, at least Titan doesn't make them go through those hassles when it has its pay-per-view shows.
Yeah, bad management, man. Look at it any way you want. It's illogical. Somebody's not paying attention. There's too many cooks in the kitchen. Where does the buck stop? Who's going to take responsibility? Hell, it sounds like America. That's where we are. So it was just the left didn't know what the right was doing. Nobody wanted to take responsibility, culpability. You know, I kid people about my title in AEW, Conrad. You know, I've had laughed about this over a mule or two. That is, I'm the senior advisor. What that means, folks, is I'm the oldest guy on the goddamn roster. That's senior, get that? And as the senior advisor, by the way, I created my own title. Tony says, you need a title. Okay, so how about this? Because I didn't really want to be an EVP or a VP or a VVVP or nothing. I've done all that. I said, how about senior advisor? It's fine. And here's my reasoning for that. As the senior advisor of AEW, now get this quote right, folks. As the senior advisor of AEW, I can feel freely to embrace in all the success that has begotten us as my idea. When something is a stinker, I know nothing. That's the senior advisor. So we had nothing there, man. Our manager was, you look, anytime you sign, and hey, look, Conrad, you and I both are wrestling fools. Maybe too much sometimes. I really believe that in our lifetime, there have been points in our life where we probably were a little bit too crazy about this shit. And I'm still crazy about it. And I'm going to always be till my time's up. But man, I'm telling you, there was just nobody there to keep the rudder in the water. And the big issue, wrestlers are the worst people. J.J. Dillon is the exception to the rule. J.J. Dillon is the most well-organized, structured wrestling person to do normal business tasks as anyone I've ever seen in the business. So it'd be like comparing J.J.'s organizational skills with Patterson's organizational skills. It's laughable. Now, if you want to compare their finishes and their creative work, that might be laughable as well on the other side. So that was what McMahon did. He found people who could do a good job. He put them in the role that they could succeed in. But we had not been in WCW at that time long enough for anybody to know who had skill level, who could do things other than just what their one little niche job was. And for me, I wanted them to know I could do a whole lot more than announce because I thought it would help my job security. The more tools in a toolbox, the better job you're going to do, and the longer you're going to be able to do it for the most money. Simple deal. So, but it was embarrassing. God, when I read that stuff again, it's just how hideous, how stupid. But when you're not, and look, when you don't have a jersey or you're not in the huddle, I don't feel guilty about it. I feel bad for the boys. But if somebody had been able, if I had been able to be a bigger role, have a bigger role in it, but there again, trust, ego, all this other shit. So, but it's sad. I read this, I'm appalled, to be honest with you.
Let's keep it moving here and talk about the show. Starrcade 88, we're finally here. Meltzer would say, for those of you who missed the show, there were very glaring production weaknesses. He's going to be very critical of that. When they would switch camera shots, you would hear a noise that would annoy you. The sound would be screwed up several times during the show, including a backstage interview that Magnum TA was conducting with Rick Steiner. It also went out for 3 minutes during Steiner's match with Mike Rotunda. There were once or twice when Bob Keidel had a dead mic and he didn't even know that was the case. So lots of production sort of snafus here. But he was very complimentary to you guys. He says Jim Ross and Bob Keidel not only called the matches well and got across the storylines excellently, they also threw in quite a bit of subtle facts and intelligently approached analysis. Tony Schiavone's role as host worked a lot better this time than it had in previous shows, where his wrestler co-hosts have either looked uncomfortable like Lex Luger, or seemed like they could have been used in a better role on the show, like Ric Flair. They did locker room interviews for the first time at an NWA pay-per-view event. So, it's not all bad. Maybe there's some production hiccups, but he's very complimentary of you, Tony and Bob. When you watch this show back for the first time in a long time, how do you think you, Bob, and Tony did?
I thought we had a nice show, a nice show. Like I said so many times here, hearing Bob's voice, and knowing that I got the opportunity and the privilege to sit next to him for all those years, in a unique time, because Bob was there and heard all the unrest in the JCP offices in Charlotte. He knew that things weren't going peachy. He understood that there were some crises, cash flow crises and so forth. And then all of a sudden, JCP is no longer in business. And he was retained there by Turner, which is great. He was always the number one guy, had been for years until Tony came in Mid-Atlantic. Bob moved to NWA Pro, and Tony was on Worldwide. Then I came in as Bob's partner. They said, Bob, we want you to move over another chair. So go from doing play-by-play on the number 2 show to doing color on the number 2 show, and let this new guy you don't even know do the play-by-play. So he did not have to like me. But I gave him every reason to like me because I really liked him. I loved his work, his straightforward. He didn't tell you what time. He just told you what time it was, not how to make the watch, et cetera, et cetera. So I thought we had a nice show. But listen to Bob's work, knowing what he went through and the unrest and uncertainty at that time at his age was unsettling. But he didn't let it bother him. And our show was smooth as hell. And Tony's great in that role. Tony's a hell of a play-by-play guy. We all know. And, I love working with him on AEW on Wednesday nights. But, boy, in that role, the studio guy, the point guy, he's really, really good in that role. So I thought we had a nice show. And it wasn't up to us to make it good creatively. All we can do is to narrate what we see and provide the lyric to what we hear, in essence. And so that's what we have to work on. But I thought we came through it okay.
Let's talk about the matches. Steve Williams and Kevin Sullivan are going to beat the Fantastics to capture the United States Tag Team Championship. 15.5 minutes. The match gets 3.5 stars. The Fantastics are one of the forgotten great tag teams that I feel like aren't discussed nearly enough. And this really showcased how talented these guys were. And an interesting sort of makeshift tag team. Talk about a clash of styles. Steve Williams and Kevin Sullivan, your old pals. What'd you think of this one?
Well, I echo what you said about the Fantastics being underrated or not talked about enough. The problem that Tommy and Bobby had, well, the perception was they very closely followed the Rock and Roll Express into a lot of territories. And that's a hard act because there's some similarity there in presentation and tandem offense and, there's style and so forth. So I thought that always held them back a little bit. But they're a hell of a team. No doubt about it. They're a really good team. And as for a babyface team, they did everything you needed to do. The women loved them and they loved them back. They could sell par excellence, just amazingly. So that got the fans to invest emotionally into the Fantastics match. and that side of the presentation, which is crucial. And I heard recently, Conrad, that Tommy's no longer with us, unfortunately, a trouble guy, and now I heard that Bobby Fulton has taken ill, and not sure exactly all the details that I should. I'd like to. I'm sure I'll try to find out. But whatever it is, we wish Bobby the best, and we hope that his fans and wrestling fans around the globe will reach out to him, let him know that they're thinking about him. Because I can't tell you how much that means to somebody on days when you're feeling kind of downtrodden. So, but they're a good team, man. Look, the star of that whole match was Dr. Death, and you're going to know I'm going to say that. He was never allowed to be himself. In that company, there was egos and all this other shit. He was the UWF champion. It was how good would it have been to let him go for a year, beating UWF guys, and let Flair go for a year, maintain the title, all building to the Dr. Death Flair match, $1 million match, to two champions against each other at one pay-per-view. It was like found money. You tell a long story and you give a payoff. And the payoff would have been Flair would have gone over. And then you could make an argument to go the other way. But bottom line of it is that he was underutilized. But he was the star of that equation. But I thought those guys did a nice job. And, it was, I thought the ratings were pretty close to good. I thought it was a really good match. It was a damn good opener, for sure. Damn good.
No doubt about it. Doc as a heel, you prefer him as a baby or a heel?
Heel.
Yeah.
Heel. I think because he is so nasty, God bless his soul, very physical, bully type persona, not Steve Williams, but this Dr. Death persona. So he was a great villain, but he's the kind of guy that you get going as hot as a heel, and then somebody turns on him, or some, back in the day, you'd bring in a quote unquote foreign heel that would cross Dr. Death as and question his patriotism or something. Then you could have he'd be a big baby face, just like Cowboy used to do from time to time. It's a layup, easy booking, but he's better as a villain. But I think about him a lot too, boy. He's certainly one of my favorites of all time, and I just wish his life had ended a little bit better. Obviously, cancer's a bad bitch, man.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Let's keep it going. Talk about an interesting feud here, to say the least. Jim Cornette on one side, Paulie Dangerously on the other, and they're both managing a different version of the Midnight Express. They get 17 minutes and 26 seconds. As you might imagine, Jim Cornette's version is victorious, 3.25 stars. It's cool to see this for a lot of reasons. Over the years, Jim Cornette and Paulie didn't exactly get along. They both will go start their own promotion, Smoky Mountain and ECW, two of the all-time great minds in wrestling, two of the great managers in wrestling. I like the concept, but I don't know that I really enjoyed new versus old. I feel like, as you and I have talked about, anytime you put the word new in front of something, it's usually not going to work. And that certainly seems to be the case here, but the wrestling itself, pretty damn good. What did you think?
Yeah, I like the match. Bell to bell was very compelling. A lot of Hall of Fame level talent in that thing. And it's just funny how over time the rivalry between Cornette and Heyman evolved. Because, and I've told them both this in front of each other at the same time. You guys are so goddamn much alike. I don't understand why you can't like each other. One just wears better clothes, and they'd all cuss me out and have fun, but really they're so much alike, so much in common, all the way back to photography days as teenagers at ringside. God Almighty, same trail they traveled, just different parts of the country, different time zones, I guess, different area codes. So I love that match, and look who you had in it, man. I mean, there's some cats in that thing that could go. Dennis Condrey's a bad dude, man. He could wrestle with anybody, and there was nobody I've seen in years that can do more things better than Bobby Eaton. I'm so proud that they got to have a little celebration for Bobby here a while back and raise some money, which is great. I salute the guys that were there. But Bobby Eaton is incredible, absolutely incredible. The Midnight Express, Stan, Bobby, Dennis, and Cornette should all be in any major Hall of Fame, including WWE, without a doubt. And if they don't go in, you know it's a political issue, because the excuse can't be, well, they didn't have a long and distinguished enough career. So if the WWE is the caretaker of the business as they purport, I'm not going to disagree with that, then how could you not induct the Midnight Express into the WWE Hall of Fame? That's my question. So, yeah, I like the match. I like the angle. We talked earlier, a little too much blood maybe in hindsight, but was it dramatic to get my attention? Yes. Was it underutilized after that point? In my opinion, it indeed was.
Let's keep it moving here and talk about the Russian assassins. They're going to keep their masks and Paul Jones's job by defeating Ivan Koloff and who Meltzer would call the junk food dog in 6 minutes and 47 seconds. Meltzer would say this match wasn't good, nor did it have much chance to be good, but at least it was watchable and didn't hurt the card.
That's arguable. That's arguable. I think it did hurt the card. It didn't need to be booked. It gave guys work.
Right.
It filled spots on the card. It was cold by and large. And look at the chemistries of the match. How could the match, looking at the individuals and the bodies and the age, et cetera, the limitations, how could it have been good? It could not. That match in that form should not have been booked.
Dark match, maybe?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. I mean, there's decent talents. There was just no angle going. There's no hard story. JYD's best days are long gone. Ivan was getting limited because of his age. The Russian assassins, Jack Victory was in that group. He's a damn good hand. But he was a mass guy that was perceived as a preliminary team. They weren't main event level guys. And Paul Jones had been, was a real good manager, but he'd been kind of downgraded to C level, like C as in Charlie. So I didn't think that match needed to be booked. And I think Jimmy looked back at some of his guys that he'd been around him for a long time and trying to get guys work, and he booked it. So it would not have been my choice.
Let's talk a little bit about the next match, because this is one that I found very interesting. I was really looking forward to it, but I thought it was too long. Mike Rotundo is going to lose the NWA TV title to Rick Steiner. Kevin Sullivan is here above the ring in a shark cage, which is always fun. Meltzer liked it, gave it 3.5 stars. And he would write, they had lots of heat early and the execution between the two was great, although the pacing was more deliberate than in the earlier matches during the early part. The match picked up about the 10-minute mark where they did a high spot, ending with Steiner taking an incredible bump out of the ring, full speed. And here's the quote that tickled me. Steiner is one of those guys who either legitimately is so tough that he can do anything to himself and it doesn't knock the wind out of him, or he's just plain insane. Probably a little bit of both. What'd you think? Meltzer would say that the place popped like crazy for the finish, which he says made it very unique. And it was such a sustained pop that it made Steiner a stronger babyface in the eyes of the fans.
I agree with that. Well, regarding the match being too long, can't disagree with that, Conrad. I thought it was a little bit too long myself, and I was there and called it. But there's a lot of parity here and a lot of negotiation that goes on about who gets how much time do we have. So you go back and look at Williams and Sullivan. They got 16 minutes, 15:50. Okay. The Express battle got 17:26. So a minute difference, minute and a half. And then you got the match with Steiner. Those guys got what, 17? You said. Something like that.
Yeah, 17.
So there's a lot of negotiation going on. So I think what Jimmy probably figured out is just to give these guys let's make everybody half-ass happy and kind of parity the time limits. And some guys, even though they won their argument and got their 17 minutes approximately, yay or nay, they may not be able to do 17 minutes of entertaining product. the fact that he gave 647 to the Russian assassins Koloff and JYD was evidence. It was evidence that he knew that this was a bad booking. And there's also a story about this match may have been booked and may have been advertised before Crockett got the final. I don't know, but sure as hell don't hurt my feelings to get the eraser out, the most powerful weapon in wrestling, and fix that problem. But you see what I'm saying? There's backstage, the negotiations for time, all those guys trying to lobby for the most time because they think they have more time they can get over because they're egomaniacs and not recognizing the fact that sometimes you're given too much time that you can't look great doing.
No argument for me. The next match, more of the same. We're going to get a long match here, but this time it's definitely a clash of styles compared to what we just saw, but they still pull it off. Barry Windham is going to be defending his United States Championship against Bam Bigelow. And of course they get 16 minutes, 17 seconds. Windham retains. He wins by count out though. And Meltzer would say in a match which showed that Windham is the heir apparent to Ric Flair's longtime role as the best all around wrestler in the business. Not only does Windham have the work itself down pat, but he's developed into an excellent smug heel over the past few months and has improved his work to where he can carry a good wrestler to an excellent match and most anyone else to a good match as well. Well, he'll get to prove his mettle in January since he's booked with JYD in the main event throughout the Atlantic coast. Meltzer gives this 3 3/4 stars. And this really, if you're sort of sleeping on Barry Windham as a great performer, anybody shouldn't. Anybody could say, well, go watch his match with Ric Flair here or there. This is Bam Bigelow. Not to say that Bam couldn't go, but a much different style worker, a much different size worker. And they get a lot of time, 16 minutes, 17 seconds. What'd you think of, Meltzer's comments that, Wyndham's going to be the heir apparent and seemingly a natural? He wasn't, from what I understand, known to be a great gym guy. He just had incredible cardio and an uncanny sense of timing and always found himself in the right spot.
Yeah. Good DNA. Black Jack was specimen, big athletic, super heavyweight guy, 300 pounder that could, great football player. Bear Bryant tried to recruit Barry's dad, Black Jack Mulligan, to come to Texas A&M back in the day. Highly recruited, Bob Windham, big time lineman that Bear coveted, but I don't know if grades or whatever else, the Marines or something got in his way. Barry's a natural, man. That's all you can, that's easy as covers. It's an easy way to say something that maybe, what does it really mean? It means that he adapted to things quicker than others. A natural is somebody that can learn something once and it sticks with them. It becomes just absolutely automatic. And Barry sometimes was amazingly profound at being automatic and in a very, very good way. So yeah, I could see that being made. I probably would have said the same thing at that point in time. But you find out going forward, and I think that Barry found out, the onus of being the top guy is not for everybody. But as far as bell to bell, Barry Windham was, when he was on, he was as good as there is. And so I know a lot of fans that are younger now listen to our show that have grown up with other brands, other talents. You should really invest in a minute or two, go back and watch this show and watch how Barry and Bam Bigelow had a strong match that Barry should have won by pinfall. That's that old protecting, we might do this, just don't have a confrontation. I hated that. Scott Bigelow could not have cared less who he put over. And if he had, people say, I don't know about that. Money talks. You're here, WCW. Here's what we want you to do tonight. But of course, if you're a good booker, they know what they're going to do before they get there. So you don't tell somebody a surprise. Oh, by the way, tonight you're going to do blank. You let them know. They can prepare. If you don't, you're an idiot as a booker. So anyway, I think Barry the fire went out somewhere to Conrad along the way. I don't know exactly what it was, what caused it, but the overwhelming fire, the competitive juices to be the best, and he was sitting right there a step away, was Barry. Just the fire ended up fading out, and I don't know exactly why.
Let's talk about Bam Bam. He's going to be, not with the company too much longer after this. Do you know why Bam Bam wound up leaving the promotion?
I would think that it might have been that he didn't feel good about where they were headed for him. Didn't have a creative plan for him, whoever they are. And pronoun boy, are you a pronoun boy or an assassin? I think he probably saw that he wasn't figured in a top spot, or he was offered more money, or the thoughts of making more money going elsewhere. Well, it's one of the two. You know that.
We know he's going to pop up in Japan, and eventually he'll find his way back over to the WWF and main event of WrestleMania against Lawrence Taylor, and then bounce back to WCW. But I was always curious, why he never really got the top guy spot in WCW. I mean, it seems like he could have been in a similar role to, say, a Vader as a top heel in the promotion. Was that ever discussed, or did he have some other sort of issue? What were people down on him? Why didn't he get that opportunity?
I think there was a general malaise or cloud of haze surrounding Bam Bam that told some that might not know him real well that he was not reliable. He was maybe a better word to say than unreliable is he was unsettled. And because of the contractual status, how these guys came in the business, and guys being free independent contractors, et cetera, did not lend to a lot of brand security unless you got a guaranteed check or contract, which very few had in that era. Very, very few. So I think he was just kind of unsettled, and there was this fear that you were going to lose him once you started investing and somebody saw how good he was, because he was very good. He's a main event guy, no doubt. And of course you could say this, well, the way to solve that is you pay him. You put him on paper, you guarantee his contract, and you pay him. How hard is that to figure out? But because of the indecision, the short-sightedness, not looking at the big picture, you don't toss away 300-plus pound athletic super heavyweights with a tattooed skull. I'm sorry, folks. You just don't do it. We're in the land of the land of the giants, the bigger than life characters, the bigger than life costumes, and all that stuff. And he was everything in that package. You don't let that guy leave. And he said, well, I don't know what we're going to do with him. Well, they'll go figure it out, you fucking idiot. How about that? So that's what I would think. He saw that, he felt it, and he's been around, a street smart guy. Asbury Park, New Jersey. He's been around the block. He just decided, I see the handwriting on the wall. I'm going to go where I can make guaranteed money, and Japan was offering guaranteed money, and they had great success with foreigners like Stan Hansen and Dr. Death coming in and making an impact. Big guys. So Crusher Jerry Blackwell got a run or two, several runs there. They liked size there, because they can. When you beat the guy that's bigger than you, as a Japanese competitor, you're bigger in your home country. You're a bigger local hero, national hero. So that's all those guys were doing. So he was valuable in that regard. So it was just the lack of foresight and big picture planning, and I'm sure somewhere along the way, Conrad, some goddamn politics rubbed their head. And of course, in the booking world, unless you're the owner, you can't impeach these bastards.
Let's talk about the next match. Somebody who is going to be impeached a bit. It's Dusty Rhodes. He's going to be teaming with Sting. They're going to challenge for the tag titles with the Road Warriors. Of course, the Road Warriors retain after a DQ, 11 minutes and 20 seconds. Meltzer would say, did you notice that Dusty didn't even wear the eye patch into the ring? It was quite obvious that even though it was Dusty's angle and Dusty should have been the focal point of the match, that the crowd popped whenever Sting was in and deadened when Dusty was involved, even when the Road Warriors went back after the eye. The move of the night was when Animal was sent outside the ring and Sting went over the top rope with a cross body block outside the ring, and the camera was in position to do the move justice. Sting does one of those flying moves made for guys who weigh 50 pounds less than he does on every pay-per-view show, and like clockwork, up until this time, the camera always seems to miss the move. Dusty did his annual drop kick as well during the match. He gives the match 2 3/4 stars. You can imagine that the finish is not going to be well received. Meltzer would say, even though this was one of the old NWA style finishes, nobody I talked with seemed to mind because nobody was thinking a title change in the first place in this match, and nobody expected that there would be a finish here. It feels like Meltzer, for whatever reason, not a big Dusty guy here, especially when he says the phrase like annual drop kick, and every time Sting was in, they were going nuts, and then they were dead when Dusty came in. And then he says nobody expected a finish. They were used to that with Dusty. What'd you think of the match, and is Dave being fair here?
I don't know that, I know Dave's friendship and relationship in general with Rick was pretty prominent. I don't think that ever existed with Dusty, and I may be wrong. So I don't think that, as it relates to the Dusty and Flair issues, or issue, however you want to term it, that Dave is completely objective because of where he stood on the matter. And he makes some very valid points. Listen, the Windham Bigelow match was a disqualification. The next match was a disqualification. That is not good booking. You don't book back-to-back DQs. You just don't. And so somebody said, well, why? I don't know why. Why was the fucking sky blue, goddammit? You don't book back-to-back disqualifications or countouts. And if you got a baby face you're trying to get sympathy on, you can shortchange the whole damn storytelling by letting him look strong and having a DQ. But it doesn't work for the story you're telling. The story you're telling, the Road Warriors by hook or crook should have beat Dusty. He needs to drop to the very bottom of the barrel to work his way right back up to the top. He went halfway down the barrel and he came back. Didn't work. I didn't like the match.
Well, what is working here, Sting, still very new to the business, in here with through bona fide stars and legends. The idea is you use your older talent to get your younger talent over. Boy, that worked in a big way for Sting here, did it not?
No, nothing. Steve Borden was never given the respect that he rightfully deserved and earned many, many times over in WCW. Why do you think that people are still talking about Steve Borden deserves that one great match to go out on, and that should be The Undertaker? It should be at WrestleMania. It should be the main event. It should go on last, all this grandiose stuff. And look, I would be for any of that. I love both Mark Calloway and Steve Borden are two of my best friends. If they both believe they could have a great match on today's standards, on their standards of today, then have at it. But I don't know that what the audience's expectations are going to be, and they may be unfair expectations. But in any event, Sting was never given his due in all the years of service, in my opinion, in WCW. And yes, he made a lot of money. And yes, they paid him a lot of money. But career-wise and just the feel of the game situation, he didn't get a great shake there at WCW more often than not. Yes, sometimes, yeah. But more often than not, he was taken for granted. And I think that's wrong.
Let's get to our main event. Before we do, I want to ask, Road Warriors, once upon a time, most over team in the biz, and now they're heels. Did you like them as heels? What did you think about their heel turn? Did you prefer them as babies? What would you have done?
Babyface team. Here's the thing. They didn't beg off. They didn't cheat. They didn't regroup. They were not the kind of guys who are going to bump 3 or 4 big spots for a comeback. So why do I need them to be heels? It's the same promo. Nothing changes. I mean, nothing changes. So why, if nothing's going to change, then why are they changing characters? Because we ran out of things for them to do. Look, here's what you do. The Road Warriors are not everyday talents. They were not everyday talents. God bless Mike. And hey, by the way, I heard James Laurinaitis on a Sirius XM radio this last weekend doing some NFL sideline reporting. Did a nice job too, by the way. I guess he listened to all those Hawk and Animal interviews all his life, and he just got to where he was a wordsmith. So I liked him better as baby faces, and he put them in there, and he put them in their category. Now you can fluctuate within the category, you can tweak the category, but they're in a spot. The spot is they're an attraction. They're shorter matches, basically high impact shit. They control one time, they make one big comeback, and they go home. Trust me, that will work. And it won't work every week, but I don't need to see them every week. But keep them in the arena that they're best suited to be good at. Is my point. And I didn't think being heels and doing what heels did in that era as pro wrestling villains was ever going to work for them. Never. Why should I hate them? I don't understand why I should hate them. What do they do? Oh, they poked Dusty in the eye with a spike. Well, that's just Dusty. They'll be back. They'll fight about it. There's no heat there. So I'd rather your question directly, baby faces all the way.
Let's keep it moving here. Let's talk about our main event. Pretty controversial match here. Ric Flair and Lex Luger. As we said, once upon a time, it was rumored this was supposed to be Rick Steiner. Instead, he becomes TV champion here. Well, will Lex Luger become the world champion? We find out after 30 minutes and 59 seconds. Meltzer would write, Ric Flair retained the NWA title with a pinfall victory. Yes, you read that right. Over Lex Luger in 30 minutes and 59 seconds. He says this match didn't contain the great moves of some of the other matches on the card, and none came close for intensity and emotional involvement. In that way, this is one of those quote unquote classic matches like Flair and Sting in March and Inoki Fujinami in August. The early part of the match saw Luger work over Flair's arm, which led to Luger holding a hammerlock. And when they brawled outside the ring, Luger moved and Flair posted his bad shoulder. It turned into fast paced at 12 minutes. At the 19-minute mark, Luger gave Flair a suplex and Flair barely kicked out, but it got a huge crowd reaction that nobody else on the card got, nor could they get. The fans really believed at that moment that the title was changing hands, and they did several other near falls, I believe 15 in all, but none matched up to that one. Luger would use the figure 4, but Flair gets to the ropes. Of course, they have the ref bump, and then Luger uses a flying body press off the top rope on Flair at 22 minutes. And once again, Flair kicks out at just the right time. The turning point in the match comes when Flair uses a chair on Luger's knee, and he hit it hard enough that it was believable. And Meltzer would say, even though Flair was carrying Luger, it's probably the first time I've seen Luger in where he worked like a wrestler with a bodybuilder physique rather than a bodybuilder trying to be a wrestler. He absolutely either belongs as a main eventer or Flair is so good that we've all been totally deceived. Flair used the figure 4 and other pinning moves, but Luger finally got out and made the big comeback. And I should mention, it was announced that Luger had dropped 13 pounds for the match. And while I'm not sure if that's true, it did appear to look it with the explanation that he needed stamina, and he did go 31 minutes. And though he was drenched in sweat, it never appeared like he was about to burst. Luger did a few power moves, and after executing them, started selling the knee again. And the finish saw Luger have Flair up in the torture rack, but Flair flipped out of it and fell on Luger for the 3 count. He got his feet on the ropes as well. 4.5 stars. A lot of people didn't see this coming. They felt like this was Luger's moment, that it was time for a change. And instead it's Ric Flair again. What'd you think?
Well, it's not that hard to explain. Look, Luger got a short change to some degree. If he had been made champion on this night, it might have worked out fine because he was just where he needed to be. By getting pinned in such an unglamorous way, even though the story was well told, no doubt, 30 minutes plus, 30 minutes. As somebody said before the show, Luger's going to go 30 with Flair and lose by pinfall. I said, you're crazy. That ain't going to happen. So, number one, I didn't think they needed 30 minutes, quite frankly. But again, we saw the politicking for the match times. And Jimmy's going to make sure and give Jimmy Crock's going to make sure and give Rick everything Rick wants. I can see that, but sometimes you got to protect Rick from Rick, and Rick didn't need a half an hour to beat Lex Luger. But in hindsight, the whole Luger thing kind of crescendoed and was never really regained, in my opinion, the peak, the feel of how good he could be. But here's the other thing about it, and maybe the most important thing. Lex can't wrestle Rick every night. Can he lead a match? Is he well enough versed and with a skill set as a pro wrestler to lead a match and help get other people over like Flair has gotten him over to this point? And that was still in work in progress, by the way. So the answer to that is no. So I think the finish went the right way, quite honestly. But, that we'll never know, unfortunately, but we'll never know. But I just didn't think Lex was ready for that role. And it's just for me, I had no vote in it. But looking back at it, Flair was a difference maker, man. He was so damn good that we forget how good. And he made us forget that Lex Luger was a very average guy at that time with an amazing, phenomenal physique, with a lot of charisma, but with very base, at best, fundamental wrestling skills. And can you take a guy with fundamental wrestling skills with a very limited move set, I know what you're thinking, folks, well, I did that with Hogan, and make them a champion? Hogan had the privilege and the opportunity to learn in the territories. And Terry Bollea took advantage of that, working with a lot of guys, and a lot of those great Southern heels love working with this big-ass babyface. The bigger he was, and they beat him, they made them look tougher. Same thing on the other side. If Sterling Golden was a great big jacked up heel, and the territory and the babyface, i.e. a Jerry Lawler or somebody, could vanish that great big guy, it put the babyface over even more. So Hogan learned his skills, but he still had the limited moveset. But he learned what he could do well and what he couldn't do well. And so I don't know that. But but Lex did not have that opportunity to learn in that arena. And that Lex never visited that classroom. And that was always going to be a problem for him.
It's an interesting match. It tells a great story, but the finish is often going to be debated. The rematch at Great American Bash in July is where it seems like Lex is going to make Rick submit to win the title in the Human Torture Rack. Babyfaces would fill the ring to celebrate with Lex, but the match, of course, will stop because of Lex's bleeding, so Rick retains. And they do a few more pay-per-view matches, most of which you called. There was just something magic about Rick and Lex Luger. And I think when you look back over this era of the NWA/WCW, Rick is really responsible for effectively, quote unquote, making both Lex Luger and Sting. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh gosh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. But unfortunately, much like and I don't know if it was Rick's contingent, but you can look at it this way. Was it a little bit of this? We talked earlier about Rick being willing and happy to carry Dusty and Murdoch's bags in the AWA, right? And then all of a sudden, Rick, as far as bell to bell in the eyes of many, became the top guy in the business, in all the business. So then you have, now this scenario comes up where you got Flair making Sting, he made Luger. But how far was he going to go with it? And I don't know that we ever saw that, because we didn't have a nice run with Luger and a nice run with Sting as the champion. It never happened, because everybody kept comparing the early days of their reign to Nate. That's not fair, because nobody is going to be like Nate. It's like judging gymnastics in the Olympics. You throw out the high score, you throw out the low score, you get an average. Well, you're going to be throwing out Flair's score every time, because he's the highest score of all. It's just not fair in that regard. So it's just ironic that Flair anointed, rubbed, got over Luger and Sting in his various storylines, but they did not reach the pinnacle that they were destined to do. And I look back at that, and that's a whole nother story in itself, of the politics of Luger and Sting, especially Sting, because I really believe that his heart was always, Lex was never a wrestling fan. Sting became a fan and became a student of the game. So, but a really interesting time. And God, Conrad, look back at the talent in that locker room back in those days. Jesus criminy. How hard did we have to try to screw that up? Really. I mean, seriously, man, it's amazing. So it's all good, but it was a fun show. I give it a thumbs up. Last match did it for me. I liked Midnight's. There's a lot of things that I liked a lot. The Fantastics, Doc and Kevin. Sully was good. I like the show. There are things I wouldn't have booked, but look, if something's on a card and you're skeptical of it being good and it's not good, don't be shocked. You already figured it probably wouldn't be. So that's kind of how I looked at it. We made the best of it. Bob and Cottle and I called it the best we could and gave respect to the talents, and that's what you always do. But they got to understand, too, that call didn't seem as emotional. Well, you got to give us a little something. You got to write some music, man, that's a foot tapping, knee slapping, head bobbing music. That's how you get a great lyric. If you ain't doing that, then we can't sing with you.
Well, we appreciate you guys singing with us this week. We'll be back next week for something totally different. Jim, let's see how this tickles you. Next week here on the show, we're going to have you sit down and watch the Nitro where they did Finger Poke of Doom. And that same week, the day before, we'll have a watch along with Tony Schiavone where he watches Mrs. Foley's baby boy win the world title. So the very show where he said, "Oh, that'll put some butts in the seats," he'll watch, and then you get to watch what they presented that night. That's a fun idea. The voice of Raw watching Nitro and the voice of Nitro watching Raw. Come on.
Yeah, it would be good. Well, I like it. I've never seen that show, so it'll be new programming to me. And we'll have some fun with it, no doubt about it. We could gut and quarter everybody we want. We could rebook the territory. We could go defecate on their legends. It's wonderful. Hey, Conrad, seriously, I wanted to thank my little website we started, jrsbbq.com, where we're selling our sauces and ketchup, mustard, jerky, seasoning, all that good stuff. We killed it during the holidays, and we're still getting orders. So those that like our products can now have a place to get it, and not just for gifts, but for regular use, which we greatly appreciate. But jrsbbq.com did about 500 orders in our inaugural first 2 weeks, and we don't have a lot to judge it by, but we believe that to be very good, and we're keeping people busy that's working with us, and so I just want to thank the folks for doing that and helping us out, being aware of it, and it's much appreciated, and it's a great legacy, honorarium for me to give my mother and my wife Jan, because it was they were so huge in this whole creation of this damn thing. So, especially Jan, and my mother created the original sauce. So it's all good. So thank you guys for that. And I don't get much here, but it meant a lot to me here at the holidays.
Well, we appreciate you sharing that with us, and want everybody to get in on the action. Check it out, jrsbbq.com. And if you haven't already, make plans to join Jim and myself and Tony Schiavone right here in my hometown of Huntsville, Alabama at supershowlive.com. Tickets are on sale right now at Stand Up Live. And that's going to be right after the big AEW show here in Huntsville. You don't want to miss it. It's Wednesday, February 5th, supershowlive.com. And then the next day, Jim and I get on a plane, and man, we're headed to London, Manchester, and Glasgow. Tickets are on sale right now through Inside the Ropes. If you want to go check that out, it's insidetheropes.co.uk/JR. I'm excited to travel across the pond with you, dude.
Me too, man. Of course, Kenny McIntosh, the Vince McMahon of Europe, will be doing an amazing job as always. He's got a great staff. He surrounds himself with great people and lovely ladies and good folks that make you feel like you're at home. And I can't wait to get over there. The audience is unparalleled, but you can't see us, folks, unless you get a ticket, and they're not going to last forever. So I hope you'll check it out, and at Kenny's website, insidetheropes.co.uk.
Check it out.
We're going to have fun. I can promise you that.
And we're going to have fun next week when we, as JR said, defecate on their legends right here next week on Grillin' JR with the voice of wrestling, Jim Ross. We'll see you next week right here on Westwood One.
Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell so you get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And go save yourself some money right now. If you're in a 30-year loan or you have credit card debt, it's not a matter of if I can save you money. It's a matter of how much. Find out right now for free at SaveWithConrad.com.